All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today for a presentation on how our CECLSolver tool can help your community bank. My name is Steve Huntington. I am the Director of Analytics here at QwickAnalytics. I've spent my entire career working with community banks in everything from strategic planning and valuation, M&A advisory, capital planning, and model development and maintenance. And I've been working with QuickRate for about a decade now. Typically, we have Sean O'Brien, president, here joining us, but he's otherwise indisposed today. So I guess you'll just have to deal with me. So just a little back, the QuickRate family of companies. QuickRate originally a deposit marketplace, but more recently, over the last decade or so, we have been developing our QwickAnalytics platform, as well as a newer division called IntelliCredit. QwickAnalytics living mostly on the public data side, some of the tools like you'll see the CECLSolver today, whereas IntelliCredit tackles more of the non-public individual loan level information, from dashboards to internal and external loan review, and pretty much everything in between. Just to give you a brief idea of what we have in QwickAnalytics so far. QwickAnalytics started with developing some basic dashboard financial performance type reports and peer comparative reports for community banks. And we have grown to build an M&A transaction database. We now collect information not just from the FDIC, from call reports. We also collect bank holding company information, as well as public company information. So SEC filings for banks of all shapes and sizes, other public bank stock data for those of you who are publicly traded and have tickers. And we've also started aggregating all that same data for credit unions over the last couple of years. So any of you out there who are interested in delving into the world or the financials or comparative information about credit unions, all of that information is there as well, in addition to a lot of mapping functionality and deposit branch market share and everything else. And more recently, we've developed our CECLSolver tool, as well as some other regulatory tools like our credit stress test and liquidity profile, et cetera. But today we're here to talk about CECL. So let's talk a little bit first about some of the main differences and similarities between CECL and the incurred loss methodology, right? The accounting standard that we've had to deal with loan loss reserves for decades, that has now officially gone the way of dodo, and we're all finally starting to live in a CECL world. Most of us, most of us have already tackled that day one adjustment, taking our non-CECL ALLL as of 12/31 and comparing it to a CECL standard-based calculation, and made that day one adjustment, and are now looking at day two and beyond. But that adjustment is as of January 1st, but certainly didn't have to be done, or wasn't done on January 1st by anybody. So it's something that everyone's still working on throughout the course of January, February of this year, and then making those adjustments and then moving on. But to back up for a moment here, so some of the main differences between CECL and the old incurred loss methodology was that CECL presents a much longer term, a more cyclical approach, looking at estimating losses over the remaining lifetimes of the loans, as opposed to in any one given period or year or annual chunk. CECL is a much more forward-looking concept, not waiting, as we did with the incurred loss methodology, until it's probable that losses have been incurred in order to allow for them. And another difference, the old concept of impairment goes away and is replaced with the CECL standard, in addition to the FAS 5 and the FAS 114 concepts also being replaced by the CECL standard. And then I have in parentheses there, or does it? Because while technically speaking, the language from FAS 5 and FAS 114 and the old impairment definition no longer exist now that we're in a CECL world, those concepts still come into play in a slightly different format under CECL. So now to the similarity. loans that exhibit unique risk characteristics and can't be pooled with any other loans still need to be sort of, we say, culled from the herd and assessed individually. What that threshold is for when you need to take a loan out of that collective bucket and manage it and deal with it on a one-off basis is subjective and has not been well defined by the regulators. The old definition, saying that, well, we'll take all of our TDRs and we'll manage them individually. Well, that's not going to help either, since the TDRs are going away on the call reports as well on March 31st, and then the old standard of impairment as well. So it still remains to be seen exactly what that, from a practical standpoint, what that threshold is going to be where we need to individually assess loans. But the idea that some loans have to be managed individually certainly hasn't disappeared with CECL. Also, qualitative factors. They're a huge part of what we're going to go through today, a huge part of calculating your ACL under CECL, but they're not a new concept, right? We've been dealing with qualitative factors for in our old methodology for decades. In fact, we use a lot of the same qualitative factor adjustments, maybe not at the same to the same degree, but the same the interagency guidance on reserves from 20 years ago, where they discussed some of the qualitative factors that should at least be considered when calculating reserves. Still very much in play today and should be used, and honestly not that differently than what you have in the past. So what you'll find is that it's all about making a bunch of reasonable assumptions and then justifying. If for those of us that think that CECL is somehow removed some subjectivity from the reserve process, think again, right? There's probably, CECL, I would say, is probably more subjective than the incurred loss methodology in calculating reserves. And something to remind ourselves of as we go through this process is who we're doing this for, right? We're playing the same game and we're playing it with the same people. We're just doing it with a slightly different set of rules. So, dispelling some kind of myths around the concept of CECL, there is no mandatory method, right? It's kind of a choose your own adventure situation. They have not determined one particular methodology that's appropriate or inappropriate for any individual community bank out there. No matter what methodology you use, whether you're using our tool, whether you're using another form-based, form-like method, or whether you're using a much more loan-level, detailed vintage or DCF type approach to CECL, you're going to have to defend that decision and justify your choice of methodology to your regulators. Community banks, on the whole, will not need to engage in some of those more highly complex and expensive models. And we'll talk about, some more justification for that. But, and of course, there's always exceptions to the rule depending upon your history of losses and the types of products that are in your loan portfolio, whether you're more of a complex institution despite being on the small side, or whether you do business in a bit of a different way that might necessitate a different approach towards CECL. But on the whole, for the vast majority of community banks out there, a warm-based method like our tool is perfectly acceptable. A little bit of just more background here. From theory to practice, we've come a long way. Seems like we've been living with CECL for years. I believe we've been doing some webinars about CECL since before my youngest child was born, and he's in school now. If that gives us any indication. It was introduced at the end of 2016, and a lot of those early theoretical considerations, if you go back and look at some of the presentations originally done by FASB and then echoed by the FDIC, in those early years, there wasn't a lot of focus on more straightforward methodologies like a warm-based methodology for community banks. But it did not take very long for them, FASB and the regulators, to realize that this is not a one-size-fits-all, and most typical community banks should not have to, and honestly are not capable of, doing some of the analysis that they had initially discussed when putting forth CECL back in the day. Questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about methodology choices and a vendor to partner with is, does your current loan loss reserve consist mostly of qualitative factors? I don't know where each of your markets is. If you're a community bank from Southern California, or from Florida, you're going to have a bit of a different experience here than if you were from the Midwest or other areas of the country that didn't take part in nearly the same extent in the last credit cycle that we had. So, you know, have you had losses on your entire portfolio, or at least in your mortgage portfolio? Completely 0.0% losses over the last 7 years. That would mean that your reserve right now, your old ALLL reserve, is pretty much built by qualitative factors, because it's not being justified by your recent loss experience. And then as a follow-up to that, is it likely that your CECL reserve is also going to be supported primarily by Q factors? And if it has in the past, it's likely to in the future. So the question becomes, is all the extra time, effort, and money of a much more complex, more loan level solution, is it going to change that? You know, if we're, however granular you want to get with your data, if it's going to show no losses over an extended period of time across most of your portfolio, it really doesn't matter how granular you get. The answer is still going to be zero, and your reserve is still going to be mostly justified through qualitative factor adjustments. Another consideration is, you know, do you have the necessary detailed loan level data, at least 5, if not 10 or plus more years worth, that some of the more complex methodologies require, even just as a starting point, in order to get ramped up and going on their systems. And when it comes to qualitative factors, we often tell people, try not to confuse precision for accuracy. Do you need 100 different qualitative factor adjustments? Do you need 100 different indicators to give you an idea of what direction your losses and reserves need to go? Or do you need 5, right? Our focus here should be on being directionally correct and taking advantage of a lot of the analysis you've done in the past. Your CECL analysis really doesn't have to look as different from your ALLL analysis as most banks, I think need to be. So again, depending upon your loss history, that extra analysis is probably not going to improve or change your required reserve very much. And if your experience has been light, you're going to need to rely on some peer data as well from similar publicly available loan segments. And what I mean by that is, again, once you look into your history, if you're looking at a whole bunch of zeros and we're trying to come up with qualitative factor adjustments or reasons to defend the reserve that you know you're going to need to have on that segment despite a lack of losses, we need to look outside your 4 walls, right, to the environment around us for cues or clues as to what is a reasonable adjustment to make. And that's where being able to pull in not just your historical loss data, but for every single one of your peers and do it at the segment level in an apples to apples way, which is exactly what our tool does, as I'll show you momentarily, becomes a critical part of not only calculating qualitative factor adjustments, but more importantly, defending and justifying to your auditors and regulators. There we go. Again, just as Jeff Gear said, who's chief accountant over at the OCC, small banks simply don't need big models. The adoption burden is expected to be commensurate with the size and complexity of your institution. Again, I think I sort of already covered this, but in reserve accounting, like CECL, we are trying to attempt to estimate an accurate reserve, not a doomsday scenario reserve. This is not supposed to be a stress testing assignment. This is supposed to be a realistic middle of the road calculation. You may be building multiple different scenarios to share with the auditors and examiners to get a feel for what range they expect or want to see you in. But this is very different from a stress testing scenario. So why did we introduce the CECLSolver? We were just we were listening to our customers, our users of QwickAnalytics, who were asking for some support on their adjustment and their transition into a CECL world. And we wanted to make it understandable. We wanted to make it easy to implement. It's applicable to community banks of all sizes. We have banks under 30 or $40 million in assets using our tool. We have banks over 3 or 4 or 5 billion dollars with the B portfolios that are also using our tool. The tool is completely tailored to the characteristics of your bank, your loss experience, your qualitative factor adjustments, your peer group. We don't believe that you need to be an expert to utilize our tool or to prepare a CECL analysis. You shouldn't have to hire somebody in order to get your ACL calculated on an ongoing basis. We can help you if you are. This is not a tool where we just stick it out there and leave you to the wolves. If and when you need any assistance using a tool, not only can you get a hold of a sales team, but you can get a hold of the people who actually built and designed a tool from scratch when you need assistance, not just in updating a scenario, but if your auditor's in there asking questions, if your examiner's in your office asking questions, you can get us on the phone. We can talk through it. It's not a problem. There's plenty of other resources that we offer in addition to the tool itself, methodology guides, white papers, implementation letters. We've just recently updated and given 2 different CECL policy templates that are up there. We have a fully working version of the Fed scale tool if anybody is looking for just a secondary methodology, just kind of to do a sanity check on their primary methodology. You can run the scale tool using our platform as well. And we have some other support matrices for Q factor adjustments. We've also got information there for your due diligence process. If you want to take a look at the validation, and we did a SOC 1, which we update every year on our tool. And we have plenty of public resources available there as well. Some of the better presentations that have been done by the various regulators and by FASB themselves, talking about CECL in general, talking about the WARM method and its appropriateness and acceptability for typical community banks. So now, without further ado, let's get into a live demo of the tool itself. Give me just a minute and I will share my screen just so everybody knows when I'm done sharing the live version on our site. I'm going to come back to the presentation here. We made sure we put a bunch of screenshots from the website into the presentation so that if you're printing off a copy of this or sharing this PowerPoint with your team afterwards, you'll have plenty of screenshots of the actual tool in use to help you as well. I'll make sure that as a follow-up to today's call, everyone gets a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording of what we're doing here today. So you can share not only today's webinar, but also a PDF of the presentation with anybody else who you think may benefit from it. So if everyone can bear with me just a minute here, I'm going to swap screens. All right, I believe, yes, everyone at this point should be seeing QwickAnalytics website. This is the main screen or the primary screen that you would see when you log into our CECLSolver tool. The entire tool lives in the cloud. And what that means is as you make any adjustments to inputs or assumptions or anything else, the entire tool recalculates on the fly. You don't need to plug in 100 inputs and then click a button to run the tool and then wait for an email or some other PDF that you have to download and open up to see the results of a tool. You get instantaneous feedback on the effect of any changes to the tool in real time. So if you change a qualitative factor adjustment, if you change a look back period, if you change a balance, a peer group, any of that information, you'll see within a quarter of a second, everything instantaneously updates right on the screen, which is extremely helpful and efficient when you're trying to build a scenario and when you're walking through the use of a tool. You kind of want to get a feel for what assumptions are really moving the needle here, right? And which ones really count and which ones are pretty irrelevant. And that'll help you decide what areas you need to spend your time on. If you find yourself hemming and hawing and spending huge amounts of time sharpening the point on one particular value or assumption, only to find out that no matter what you plug in there, it ain't making a hell of a difference in the reserve calculation, you know that you don't need to spend as much time on it. So you'll get a feel for that pretty quickly using the tool so that you spend your time where it's really helpful and you don't waste any time. Something you'll notice when you first log in here, since we're getting your historical information directly from your call reports, right? We're going into all of your historical call reports, getting balance information, charge off, recovery, past due information for every single call report segment of your portfolio. It's all there the second you first log in. There's no data on financial losses that you have to plug into our tool in order to run it. The same goes to be said, not just for your bank, but your peer group. Whether your peer group is your entire UBPR peer group, or all the community banks in your state, or the 5 counties that surround you, however you want to build a peer group, whether it's custom, whether it's a kind of a default or national peer group, it's extremely easy and intuitive to build peer groups. You can use any sort of characteristics you want. If you want all of the, de novo banks in Florida between $100 and $500 million in assets in these 5 counties, it takes about 30 seconds and you can build that peer group. So you can be as customized as you want in your peer group generation. And as you build and plug in peer group information, again, everything recalculates on the fly. You'll notice that we have started by default, we have segmented the portfolio around the buckets that we get from the call reports. That allows us to immediately populate the tool with all of your historical experience and do the same in a perfectly apples to apples way for your peer group. So we're taking a sample bank here. This is a larger community bank out of New England. And this is how the portfolio is segmented. So for today's purposes, I went ahead and plugged in a bunch of sample values for WARMs because we're using the WARM method. Stands for the weighted average remaining maturity method. The first step, and honestly, this is something that you need to be doing no matter what methodology you use for CECL, we need to get our hands around what is the average remaining life of the loans that we currently have on the books, right? CECL is all about estimating losses over the remaining lives of the assets. So we have to know what the remaining lives of our pools of assets is. That's not something that is publicly available, right? Nowhere on our call reports does it ask us to calculate weighted average remaining maturities and plug it in. So we don't have that as a resource. So that's the one area where we need your assistance in utilizing the tool, is to do those WARM calculations. We provide lots of this. If that's not something that you have readily available, maybe you're already doing, remaining maturity calculations for other purposes at the bank. That's great. Maybe your core processor or ALM provider has a report that you can generate or request that does weighted average remaining maturity calculations that are appropriate for CECL. That would also be great. If you need to do the calculations yourself internally, that's not a problem. We can walk you through that process. If you just don't feel like doing the WARM calculations and you want to hand that off as well, we can take that entire process on and handle and calculate the WARMs for you as often as is necessary on a quarterly basis, for example, for CECL. We start by providing what we call a WARM estimator tool. I'm just going to click on this just for a second so you can get a feel for what that looks like. The WARM estimator tool is an Excel-based tool that walks you through exactly what you would need to do and how you would calculate a weighted average remaining maturity. For you. This is the one so that even using the WARM method, you need to look at loan level data. So we summarize right here all your different segments of your portfolio, all the most important assumptions about WARM calculations, like what methodology you're using for the WARM calculation, what type of prepayment assumptions you're using, et cetera. We have some other data from other regulatory bodies, including most notably the NCUA, actually, because they've actually provided some really good guidance for credit unions and community banks when it comes to prepayment rates and WARM calculations. But the tool is organized by call report segment, and it shows you exactly how to cut and paste your loan data, balance information, maturity date information into a tool like this and do a basic WARM calculation. And if you want to take into account amortization on a straight line basis, kind of a universal basis, or on a loan level basis, you can do that too using the tool. So lots of flexibility here. This is something that you can just take and utilize at your leisure if you need some assistance with the WARM calculations. If you want to hand off the entire process of doing WARM calculations to us, we would be using this Excel tool, putting your loan data in here, cleaning it up, and then presenting or providing you with this spreadsheet each quarter to assist. I think that's enough said about the WARMs. But once we have those WARM calculations and we plug them in here to the tool as an input, then we're really off and running. So let's kind of take a guinea pig for today, and we'll just go with 1 to 4 family. Let's say we calculated the weighted average maturity of our mortgage loans after taking into account pay downs, prepayments is 6.5 years. So you notice I typed in 6.5 there. And in that 1 second there, everything just recalculated on the fly across the board for 1 to 4 families as it pertains to CECL. What do I mean by all that? Well, if we know that our WARM is 6.5 years, what CECL is really requiring of us is that we project 6.5 years worth of future losses on that segment, right? Losses over the remaining lives of the asset. So in order to project 6.5 years going forward, our tool takes a symmetrical view of the look-back period, at least by default. You have the ability to change look-back periods, but by default, if we're going to project 6.5 years, we're going to go back in time and look at a 6.5-year period in the past and analyze your experience. How have your balances changed in that 6.5-year look-back period? How many charge-offs have you aggregated? In what direction are those charge-offs trending? How many recoveries have you had? And we'll analyze all that information and then calculate what is, in effect, the first big piece of the puzzle for CECL. And that is, what is our institution's historical lifetime loss rate on this pool of loans? For this particular community bank, it's 11 basis points. I'm going to head into, but of course, there's a lot of data that goes into that 11 basis points right there. But because of the way we've designed the tool, there is no black box here. You can fully audit to get completely from cradle to grave, from your call report values to that 11 basis points by utilizing a couple of the tools here right on the site. So all that information that supports that is right here in the historical detail or historical analysis tab. So what you'll see here is all the same segments of the portfolio. We look at balances and we track them over time. So all these blue shaded areas, that's just a visual representation of a look back period that we're using for each segment of the portfolio. Again, we're matching the look back periods to the WARM calculations so that we have a look back period that has the same duration as we're trying to project forward. And again, you can modify the start or end point of your look back periods, but let's just say we wanted to use the most recent 6.5 years. We see how the mortgage portfolio has certainly grown for this bank, has almost doubled in the last 6.5 years. You can go back further in time if you need to. Then we scroll down here, we can dig into the details of charge-offs, look at the charge-off experience over time, see how it's trending, see when the lumps came and how big they were. We can do the same thing with our recoveries and see how they've come in as well. Obviously, where the rubber really meets the road is the net charge-offs. So at the bottom here, we track net charge-offs by segment over time. We can toggle back and forth between dollars and ratios. And we see that over the entire 6.5-year lifetime look-back period, this bank has a lifetime loss rate of 11 basis points. So if I head back up to the summary, that's where the 11 basis points there is coming from. So that's kind of the first half of CECL. We haven't looked outside our 4 walls. We haven't considered qualitative factor adjustments or peer experience, but we have defined if the future were to be exactly like the past, this is what we would need to have in our reserve. This is the total expected losses that we might expect, all things being equal, on the loans we currently have on the books. Now, we all know that current and future conditions are never identical to the historical experience. That's where the Q factors come in. So this is kind of your home page, your home base for qualitative factor adjustments. You'll notice here, you'll recognize a lot of the language in these different columns. These qualitative factor adjustments are the same ones that you have had to consider historically with your old reserve. This is where you don't need to be reinventing the wheel any more than you have to, right? You have to consider things like lending policies and procedures, changes in portfolio mix and management and staff and collateral values, et cetera. So we have spaces for all these different qualitative factor adjustments. You don't need to make an adjustment for every segment for every adjustment, right? If there are certain qualitative factors that you don't think are applicable to your institution at all, you can remove them completely by just Xing out of them. If you want to add additional custom Q factor adjustments, let's say that you completed a merger 3 years ago, and most of the loans that you acquired are off the books at this point, but there are still some you need to manage, and you do that as a separate process, and you want to add in a qualitative factor adjustment as a result of that. You can come in here and merger effect, give any sort of custom qualitative factor adjustment you want, and then add in a value for it. So you come across here, you make all of your qualitative factor adjustments. This is where you make your notes. So CECL is very much a points for pencil kind of standard. I think it's probably less important how much of an adjustment you made and much more important the narrative or the explanation that goes along with it. So the great thing about our tool, we have a lot of administrative features like this, right where you're making your adjustments, you're making your notes, you're building that narrative, that audit trail, so that as you go through this tool, when you export it, when you share it with an auditor or an examiner, they can follow what assumptions you've made, why you've made them, what your explanation for them is, and not just externally, but right when you come back in next month or next quarter to adjust your CECL analysis, this will be your notes. This will remind you why you made that adjustment last quarter and give you the basis for whether it needs to be modified or if it's still appropriate. Excuse me. We also have some additional tools here right on the Q factors page. This is kind of a visual summary of CECL, which is really great to kind of just get a visual feel for what's kind of going on here. And what I mean by that is if you click on any segment of the portfolio, let's just stick with the mortgage loans for now, you can see in one visualization what your long-term trend in losses was, that's the blue bars, what your peer group's long-term trend in losses, that's the green line. By the way, for this particular sample institution, they're located up in Maine. And so I chose all community banks in the state of Maine as a peer group, just for default, if anyone was curious. The shaded gray area is just a depiction of a look-back period that we're using for CECL estimating and for the segment. And then the orange line is the total CECL estimate, percentage-wise, that reflects all the inputs that we plugged in. So if we change a look-back period, if we up or down, bump up or bump down a Q factor adjustment, you'll see this orange line change in real time, and I'll do that. I'll go ahead and add a whopping 50 basis point adjustment for portfolio mix, and you'll see there, the CECL estimate just increased significantly as a result of that. If you're looking for trends upstream from net charge-offs, we have that as well. You can go upstream and say, hey, well, I want to see kind of what my reserve looks like versus my non-accrual trends. So if you're looking for more emerging credit trends, right, before it becomes a net charge-off, what direction are non-accruals going in? And even further upstream from that, if you want to see, for example, 30 to 89 days is the first time that, an issue with a loan is going to show up in black and white on our call reports. So we can go that far upstream to show you some of those trends and what direction they may be headed in, which can give you not only indication of future trends in charge-offs, but also justification for qualitative factor adjustments. We also have a slew of economic trends down here. So if you want to sort of overlay your loss experience or past due experience over top of a, let's say, statewide unemployment rate or GDP or CPI or coin PPI or corn products, you can get some of those trends and take a look to see if you see any sort of significant correlation between your experience or your peers' experience and any other economic trends. I believe that's everything I wanted to point out. So one of the most important qualitative factor adjustments that we can really provide assistance on is based upon peer experience. So what we want to do here is pretty much, the entire historical analysis we do for your community bank, right? Where you're plugging in your WARM and we're tracking your balances and charge-offs and recoveries and trying to get a feel for what that historical experience was loss-wise over that look-back period. And we also do the exact same complete analysis for every single other bank in your peer group. And that's, in effect, what we do. So this entire analysis here, we replicate behind the scenes in real time for every single other bank in your peer group. And then we aggregate them all together, and that becomes this. This peer data page shows loss rates for your peer group by segment using the same segmentation, right? Apples to apples as we're using for your bank, and overlaying your look back period so that we can in effect, calculate lifetime loss rates for your peer group that we can compare perfectly comparably to your historical lifetime loss rate in order to give you a feel for, yes, this was my experience, but ignoring my experience and looking at the wider, broader market that surrounds our institution, what does everyone else's experience look like over the same, with the same product, right? With the same segment. And so we think this data is extremely helpful. It's most helpful for segments where you just don't have much of your own loss experience, right? When you're dealing with a whole bunch of zeros in your experience, yet you're trying to justify having where your reserve level is, the peer data can really, really help get you there. And so using this data, comparing, even on the summary page, you'll see we compare your historical loss rate with the peer groups, apples to apples. It lets you know how much better or worse you've been experiencing losses there than they have. It allows you to justify an adjustment to move back in the direction of peers as a Q factor adjustment right here. So that's how those sort of interplay with each other. Now, after we've made all of our qualitative factor adjustments, then we've really arrived at our expected future loss rate. It's simply our historical experience plus or minus all the net adjustments we're making to it for current and future conditions is equal to our expected future loss rate. Once we have that, we need to make some adjustments and we need to apply it to our current loan balance in order to calculate a necessary reserve, necessary ACL for it. So the next step is pulling down current loan data. So by default, our tool is going to pull down your most recent balances from the call report. That's all that we have access to publicly. But just because it's going to default to the most recent quarter end does not limit how often you run this tool or when you run it as of. You can come in here and say, I want to run this as of today, February 22nd. You just override these quarter end balances with your February 22nd balances and then just say, hey, this was actually 23. Sorry, it's 2023 now. You can plug in manually, type in a date there so that you have a reminder. If you want to go back in time and pull down balances as of a historical date, you can come right in here and say, you know what, I just want to do this as of last September 30th. As soon as I did that, all those balances are now September 30th balances. So you can update and override current balances to be automatically any quarter end date that we have from the call reports, or manually any date that you want to plug in your GL balances if it's, you know, at a month end or anytime you want to run it as of. This is also where, and this is something we're updating in the next couple of weeks, but you can also modify or adjust your current balances to exclude any balances that you don't want as part of a CECL analysis. This is critical for banks that have large SBA program portfolios that have a good bit of government guaranteed balances. We don't need to be establishing reserves for government guaranteed portions of our SBA portfolio. If you still have some sizable amount of PPP or COVID loans, right, on the books, that's where you would back out here. If you have a fully insured portfolio of fully insured loans, then you know, share deposit type ones, like then you can back out those balances there too. So, and if you have held for sale loans that are on the books at fair market value, that's outside the scope of CECL. Lots of potential ways you might make some probably minor adjustments to your current balances so that you're not overstating your necessary reserve. And then the last thing we need to do is deal with any individually assessed loans. So we have a template here where you can come in and plug in either loan level adjustments to loans that you feel need to be individually assessed on a one-off basis, or you can do that separately on an ancillary sheet, and then you can just plug in the summary for each call report segment. It's up to you, but all we ask is that you let us know what segment it's coming from, right? What bucket we're pulling it out of, so to speak, and what the expectation is there. And then that flows directly through to the summary. If you had a $450,000 loan that you were individually assessing, we're going to back that out of your current balance in order to calculate the collectively assessed pool. And then we would just simply apply, at that stage, apply the expected future loss rate to the collective balance and collectively evaluated balance. And then we get a CECL reserve. Another area to make notes here. Again, whenever you make any notes, whether it's in the Q factors page or on the summary page here, those notes get attached to that segment throughout the analysis, whenever you save it or export it, so you can always see it. It always, if you print off a copy of the output report, it's going to organize and put those notes right in there as well. At this point, we add up all those collective CECL calculations. We get a total collectively assessed amount. We add in the reserve for the individually assessed loans separately down here, and then we help you. We give you some spots to deal with held to maturity securities if you have any. Based upon the results of our, I don't know how many of you join us for our monthly coffee talk webinars, but we did a bunch of polling on our users, of which we have a few hundred users of the community banks who are using our CECL tool now, so a pretty good user base. And I think it was that 93% of our users currently are not making an adjustment for held to maturity securities. That's not a big surprise. Most community banks out there simply don't have much in the held to maturity securities portfolio. If they do, most of it is in government guaranteed, and there's no real risk of credit loss. If there is, then this is where you could manage that as well and have it feed into the summary tool. And then the last thing to discuss is unfunded commitments. So it's not a piece of the puzzle for most of you as well. However, it is something that we have to deal with. You already currently have a spot on your call report hidden deep in the other liabilities section that asks you if you want to calculate some sort of an allowance for off-balance sheet credit exposures. The vast majority of community banks aren't doing that right now. They're putting a zero there or just not reporting it. Under CECL, there's going to be a little bit of a renewed focus on that. So we wanted to make sure we provided a module that would help walk you through, how do I estimate a potential, an ACL on loans that don't exist yet, right? On unfunded commitments. And so this is how you would go about doing that. It's all a little bit hypothetical because, in effect, they're asking you to estimate future lifetime losses on loans that don't exist yet, but we still have to take a shot at it. So this is the methodology you use to get there. We can extract current balances from the call reports. You are filling out current balances on unfunded commitments, not all the same buckets as we are on Schedule RCC. It would be too easy, right, to do it that way. But the FDIC designed the call reports to have some different buckets for unfunded commitments. That's fine. We take those, we display them here. We help you calculate or help you figure out which balances meet the definition of unconditionally cancelable. Things like unused credit card lines are always unconditionally cancelable. Usually overdraft protection commitments are as well. Sometimes locks are, sometimes they're not. That's something, that's a question for the lawyers as to how your contracts are written, as to whether they meet that definition or not. It's important to consider that because any amounts that are unconditionally cancelable, we can back out and we can completely ignore from a CECL perspective. So that's not a step we want to gloss over. It might mean the difference between having to deal with this and not having to deal with it at all from a CECL standpoint. Whatever's left over, the amount that is not cancelable is your net unfunded commitment. Those are the balances we have to at least try to do some estimating on potential losses if they were to get funded. So this is where we're estimating the likelihood that it does get funded, right? And then for how long do you have this commitment? And then if it were to be funded, what kind of losses might we see? So the default values we have here are based upon guidance that we've gotten from the FDIC. In deep within the bowels of Schedule RCR Part 2, the FDIC has done what they call CCFs, or credit conversion factors, which is kind of their estimates of the likelihood of funding for different products. So we start by giving you defaults there. Most people are not ever modifying these defaults because most institutions simply don't have the data to really go back and do their own study on probability of funding for these types of products. We have a lot of good footnotes here explaining where we come up with these assumptions, and they're all completely modifiable. Same thing with the length of commitment. And then finally, expected loss rates. These are derived from the loss rates we've seen on your actual portfolio in the past. So some good default values here. So we don't leave you to the wolves when it comes to the unfunded commitments. We help you get there. But again, don't spend weeks pulling your hair out about that. It is, in almost all cases, a very minor piece of the puzzle, but it's there. Once we factor all that in, we get total CECL requirements. We can compare it to your current reserves. We can let you know how far you're likely to be overfunded or underfunded. This is all within the framework of, if you've not done that initial adjustment yet. If you've already done your initial adjustment, you now have an ACL that is CECL appropriate, and you're looking for, on a quarterly basis, you're looking for, what adjustments do I need to make? How do I need to handle the actual provision? How do I need to handle the ACL for the loan portfolio on the balance sheet and everything else? We're redesigning the bottom of the summary here in order to be more in line with the actual call report values that we're now starting to have to fill out. So that should be helpful. Trying to think what else I want to point out here. We have a new feature for file uploads. This is just for users. Any other ancillary documents that you would like to have and keep organized with your CECL or your reserve accounting analysis, you can upload them and save them here, and then they'll be accessible anytime you want, whether it's an updated policy statement, whether it's loan level information for WARM calculations, whether it's a separate narrative that you've written around some of your qualitative factor adjustments or economic data, any other documents that you'd like, you can upload here and attach them to a specific scenario, or just attach them in general, and you can access them whenever you'd like to. Now, administration, how does the tool work? Once you've designed and built a scenario, you want to go ahead and save that as a new scenario, give it a name, give it a date. Once you save that scenario, it's preserved forever securely. You can come back to it and access it anytime you want to. You can have as many people at the bank accessing your scenarios as you'd like. We don't charge extra for more logins or anything like that. We don't charge by the scenario. You can save as many as you'd like to. And when you're done and you want to share this with a different audience, you can export, and you have full functionality, full control over what data you export and how you export it. If you just want a quick summary for the board, they're not going to want 100 pages of data. They're going to want a quick summary analysis. If you're sending it to your auditors, they're going to want the whole kit and caboodle, so you can select everything. But you have lots of control in what you export from the tool, and whether you export it to a PDF or to an Excel file. The Excel file being visually formatted pretty well, so it still follows visually, and you can print directly from the Excel file if you'd like, to add some columns or rows or adjust some notes or anything in there. We also have a separate export, which is what we call just a detailed historical data dump. This is for if your auditors are digging deep and trying to to get you to do more internal validation or auditing of some of the historical calculations, and you want a dump of every single financial value that you have historically that goes into any of these calculations, then that Excel export will give you that. It's a little voluminous, but it gives you all the data that you would need. We obviously didn't want to present in our interactive model here every single quarterly value that gets you to the calculations. Otherwise, this would be a very unwieldy interactive page. So you'll see we have summary or annual calculations here, even though all the quarterly values in each of these years does go into the math. I want to point out we do have, again, a user guide here. It's a detailed step-by-step visual user guide. If you're using the tool and just want a quick refresher, or have someone new at the bank and you want to get them up to speed, this will take you step by step through how to run the tool, how to update it, best practices for making adjustments, and everything else. So this should be your first step when you're trying to get some assistance with the tool. We also have, again, there's the WARM estimator tool. These are all those internal resources that I mentioned before. A copy of our SOC 1. This is a Q factor determination support matrix. It's just another Excel file which provides you with a framework for some more detailed qualitative factor adjustment, assumptions, and defense. We can go to the Fed scale tool for just a moment here. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this, but when the Fed came out with the scale tool, although it suffers from some very significant limitations, which I'd be happy to discuss individually with any of you, we thought it was important enough for us to go ahead, recreate it, faithfully rebuild it in our environment here, so that you can always run it if and when you see fit as a comparative tool or a backup methodology or anything else. And you can save these scenarios that you build them as well. But it's very straightforward and if backwards in some of its methodology, and can be helpful from that perspective. So we have that in there as well. Again, a couple of these policy templates. These are Word documents that we think will help you. If you haven't finished, if you're still working on rewriting that policy, that is not it. Hold on. We have a couple different versions. These are not 100-page Word documents. We started with a framework and we filled in where and when necessary. This was a collaborative effort between us and some early adopters of CECL, some banks themselves, as well as a handful of different auditing and accounting firms that also lent their experience to get this started. So hopefully that'll give you a good start if you haven't already tackled that. At this point, I think I've pointed out everything that I'd like to here on the interactive tool. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint presentation. So if everyone will just bear with me again for one more second. All right, hopefully I believe I'm back to the PowerPoint presentation. And so these are some of those slides. These are just screenshots from the tool that I've already discussed with you, that I wanted to make sure you had them in black and white color, I guess, so that you could print them off if that's the way you'd like to share this internally in your bank. So again, just reminding you how to utilize the tool, exactly what it's doing, some updated enhancements, the ability, you'll notice there's that new column for adjustments and exclusions. A lot of our users, were asking us if we could add a column so they didn't have to manually subtract values from their call report balances. They wanted to have a separate discrete column where they could notate their adjustments to those balances for purposes of CECL. And so we added that in there. Then there's the reformatting of the summary page there. That's circle C on the bottom there, where we're making it match up more closely with the actual accounting entries and adjustments you'll be making now that we're no longer looking at total CECL impact. We are living in a CECL world, and so it's a little bit different now. Just reminding us how to handle and how to utilize the Q factors, the individually assessed loans, and the new file upload feature, and some more information about this one sheet here. If you read the pop-outs, will kind of explain exactly how you might utilize the scale tool if you want to utilize it at all. And then this is where a lot of that data comes from. This is just a kind of a screenshot from another area of QwickAnalytics. So if you were to have access to our CECLSolver tool, you also have access to the rest of QwickAnalytics as well. So you can look at data like this. This is that disaggregated reserve data that larger banks, over $1 billion in assets, are now having to fill out on their call reports on a quarterly basis. So this will give you a very good feel, depending upon what peer group you want to look at, as to, at least for some of the bigger banks, what trends, where they're headed directionally from a reserve standpoint, with a little bit of granularity. There's only 6 buckets, so it's not like we have 50 different segments that we have this disaggregated reserve data on, but we have a handful, and it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. So that's the type of information you'd have at your fingertips, not only for CECL purposes, but also for just general financial analysis. Just a quick update on some of the enhancements that we've done recently on our tool, the more updated user guide, that the Q factor support matrix that I didn't really kind of demo for you today, but if you wanted to do a one-off, a one-on-one with us, we'd be happy to walk you through what that looks like as well. The enhanced Excel-based WARM estimator tool with all the amortization support that's in there now. The complete historical data set export is a newer addition to the tool, as is the file data upload and management, and the ACL policy templates. So one thing I wanted to point out, just while I have everyone here on the call, is one of the biggest concerns we are always finding with our users or potential users is concerns about WARM values and assumptions, because whether you're using the WARM method or any method, average remaining maturity of the loans in your portfolio is the #1 driver of your reserve calculation. And so the assumptions that are hidden inside your WARM calculations, one of the biggest of which is prepayment assumptions, is critical to your reserve value. And we've seen people go down lots of rabbit holes trying to spend a huge amount of time or money or energy doing their own long-term prepayment studies with their own individual loan data. That can be extremely time-consuming. A lot of banks simply don't have the data to do it at all, even if they wanted to. And even if you did all that, you still wouldn't be at the end point, because what they're asking for here is your assumption about future prepayment values, not your experience with historical prepayment values. So it's a lot of work to do if you're trying to do that all in-house by yourself. So I'd suggest getting some assistance and some support we can give you some good default values for prepayments based upon industry guidance, and we can help you with those warms. I think I already mentioned that. So if you wanted to hand off the warm calculation part of it, if you'd like to use our tool and you just don't have the time or the resources to do those warm calculations and you can't get any help from your core in doing it, we can handle it for you. That would obviously involve you handing off the loan level data in a secure environment for us so that we can look at that data. We can organize it by call report segment and clean it up and then do those warm calculations. But rest assured that we can do that for you. So that should not be an impediment to getting going here. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we have another sister division called IntelliCredit. They deal completely on the other side of the wall in loan level analysis. They are a credit shop that we have in-house that can help with anything from dashboards to risk grading to internal and external loan review and for loan level CECL analysis. If you're worried that you're going to get, quote, too big for warm, or your institution might get too complex, or just you want to know if you have options as you grow and get bigger, if you need a more advanced solution, or at least you need to kind of zoom in on a particular segment of your portfolio beyond the portfolio level approach that the warm method is. We can help you with that as well. Our IntelliCredit solution can digest your flat file, your ILDR, and provide that type of analysis at a different level as well. So we can work with you as you grow. So what are your next steps? Call us, shoot us an email. We'll schedule a walkthrough. Me or one of the salespeople will sit down. We will go through your CECL analysis with all of your data on the screen live on our site. Help you talk through any situations or, that may be unique to your institution, and help get you where you need to go. So if you already have a solution for CECL, but you're looking because you're looking for an alternative that might be a little bit easier or cheaper, we'd love to help you get on board. If you're trying to do it yourself and you feel like you need some assistance, and that's why you're here, no matter why you're here on the call today, we can help get you going or keep you going when it comes to CECL. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder that coffee talk session every single month, Sean O'Brien and I, and sometimes some guests from the accounting world join us, and we have kind of I wouldn't call it a free-for-all exactly, but it's just a live discussion of CECL. It's driven by the questions that we get on the coffee talks. So if you have a bunch of questions or you'd like a discussion of some particular part of CECL and you want to do it on the coffee talk, please come and join us. I think we had well over 300 community financial institutions that were on last Friday on our coffee talk session, and we had over 50 questions from the crowd. So it was a great forum for talking about stuff, getting updates on what's going on. As we're getting feedback from examiners and auditors that are on the ground dealing with CECL, we bring them on, we share that feedback, and it's just a great way of keeping abreast of what's going on in the world of in the rapidly evolving world of CECL. So that's next month on March 24th at 10 a.m. You can, I'll send this presentation out today or tomorrow, and then you can click on the button there and register for it. Even if you can't show up at 10 a.m. on the 24th, go ahead and register. And if you are registered, we'll make sure we send you a copy of the whole presentation and the video and everything from it that day. Again, thanks everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate you spending some time with us, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.